Right. Diane asked me to participate in this event prior to the election, and I was excited to say yes. And even after the election, I was excited to be here with you because I like you. And then yesterday, I did 6 hours of constituent office hours, 1.5 hours in each of the 4 towns I represent. And constituent after constituent came to tell me how scared they were. Many cried. And when I left the Chelmsford Library last night, I was no longer excited to stand on these steps. And I threw out what I was going to say to you, and I wrote this speech 2 hours ago between birthday party drop-offs, hence why I'm reading this. I'm going to tell you the most honest thing I think any politician can say right now. I'm not in a position to reassure you. I'm not in a position to minimize your concerns. If we have mass deportations of immigrant parents, their children left here will not be okay. If we continue to roll back maternal health care, there are women who will not be okay. If Russia is given carte blanche in Eastern Europe, that will not be okay. I also want to acknowledge that part of the reason many of you are so scared is that imposition of fear and anxiety was plan A, B, and C of Democrats' national campaign strategy: to demonize the other half of the country and their candidate and make you fear them. They left it to us to pick up the pieces if that strategy failed, which it did. The cavalry's not arriving. The cavalry is us. You, me, all of us. You don't need reassurance. You need and you deserve, number 1, honesty, and number 2, vigilance. So let's talk first about honesty. Before I go any further, and this is always the case whenever I come to speak to you, but it needs to be called out now that I'm speaking for myself only. None of the organizations that planned today's event knew in advance what I'd say. They couldn't. I just wrote this. I'd like to read you an email that was sent to me and anybody on the Massachusetts Democratic Party listserv on the morning of June 28th. That was the day after President Biden debated now President-elect Donald Trump. How many of you watched that debate? Just a show of hands, like actually watched the debate. Not read the New York Times, not saw clips on X. Okay, so most of you. And I'd ask you, and I know it's not pleasant, just to remember for a moment what you saw. What you actually saw, what you actually heard. So here's the email that was sent out the next morning. Joe Biden held Trump accountable last night, comma, Simon. That's the subject line. They knew my name, which is a good start, I guess. President Biden took Trump to task on his reckless hypocrisy and dangerous rhetoric and perfectly made the case for 4 more years of progress. The comparison could not have been more clear. President Biden used his time on the debate stage to speak directly to the American people and proved that he cares about our future, etc., 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 and then there's an ask for money at the end.
We didn't get that email.
I did.
She did.
Yeah.
Make no mistake, this entire time, they knew. The party knew. Before and after the debate, they knew. They prevented other candidates from making the ballot for a Democratic primary in many states.
Like RFK Jr.
The party squashed any chance of a primary debate. They gaslit the entire nation.
Yep.
Told the American public from the podium at the White House press office that concerns about President Biden's health were solely the product of right-wing, quote, deep fakes. And when they knew, that you knew. They told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and your ears. We have the receipts of this.
Yep.
So before anyone gives me their 5-point plan, and they're already trying to move on to that, or tells me about the resolve to fight Donald Trump, I want to hear an admission that they knew and why they didn't do anything about it. Thank you. I realize this might be hard for elected officials, so I'm going to model it for you right now. I know they knew because I knew too. Most of the people I talked to about this and asked for advice told me not to say anything in public. Some of them, I know, were doing it out of genuine concern and care for my political future.
Oh, yeah.
Others, I think, were doing it because if I said something, they might have to too.
Yeah.
So I kept it to myself and privately resisted by voting for Dean Phillips in the primary in March. I want to tell you the argument that resonated with me the most during these conversations. It was that you're just a state rep, so no one will care. Why take the risk? That was convincing to me. It was. It wasn't until yesterday during office hours that the implications of that comment really struck me in a different way. Because I was sitting there listening to my constituents, and I care about what my constituents say. When they tell me something, it affects how I do my job and how I think about issues. So shouldn't that also be true of me? That's my explanation. I'm sorry. I'll try to be better in the future. There's a point to this. It's not to criticize anybody else or self-immolate. The point is that integrity matters. Credibility matters. It is earned and it can be lost. When I was a teacher in Harlem, my students didn't learn anything from me until they trusted me, no matter how good my lesson plans were in math. When I was a prosecutor, my colleagues and I zealously sought out to stamp out any doubt that any comma, semicolon, or pause could be wrong. And if we did make an honest mistake, we corrected it immediately before the court. Because no matter how persuasive or eloquent our arguments might be, if they didn't trust us, it didn't matter. You already know that this applies to your everyday lives, your professions, your families, your friendships. It applies to politics too. It is a prerequisite to policy. So again, I don't want to hear about your 5-point plan to fix this until you fess up. I'd like to read you part of an email that I wrote to my supporters on Monday, the day before the election. I had initially set out to write 2 versions, one if Vice President Harris won and one if she lost. But in drafting it, I came to the conclusion that the things most worth saying were those that I'd say irrespective of the outcome. And I feel even more sure of that now. Like many of you, I'm already tired of the endless post-election takes. The infinite variations and explanations and justifications, slicing and dicing the data to fit a narrative that behooves its author. Point 1 was just about me, that I love my job and was so grateful to be reelected. I knew that was going to happen on Monday because I was unopposed this time, so we can skip that. Point 2 was about the gaslighting of the American public, and I've made that point, I think.
Here,
Point
here.
3 is the culture of entrenched incumbency needs to end.
Here, here.
This goes beyond just the presidency. In the 2-party system, primaries are an essential accountability mechanism for elected officials in terms of their proximity to their constituents, ideologically and otherwise. Primary challenges are also help combat the groupthink that can overtake members of political parties.
Here, here.
Many friends texted me this election cycle from multiple jurisdictions expressing their dismay at how few options they had on the ballot.
Yeah.
There are organizations operating in Massachusetts like New Politics and Run for Something that recruit people to run for office. Legislatively, jungle primaries, ranked choice voting, and other mechanisms may cause an improvement, But there is little institutional incentive for incumbents to pass these measures. And
Right.
some have been unpopular as ballot initiatives in Massachusetts. Efforts to recruit candidates are intrinsically grassroots. They cannot start at the top. This is perhaps an obvious point, but one which bears repeating. If you know people who are considering running for office or should, please encourage them. Next, the message of national unity is a good one, but it needs to be complemented by a more humble attitude and intellectually honest approach towards policymaking. The failure to address a surge in post-2020 illegal border crossings, including, tragically, by unaccompanied minors, either through executive or congressional action, laying a crisis at the feet of local and state governments, including Massachusetts, including in Concord, is a good example of our collective shortcoming in these respects. Working class people and Latinos are leaving the Democratic Party, and I wrote this on Monday, we know it's even more true than we thought today, in significant part due to the problems at the border, they say this, and the deep impact a virtually open border has had on communities throughout the United States. There are major moral consequences to the immigration crisis, including the vast expansion of cartel-controlled human trafficking. The Democrats' answer to these criticisms usually seems to be that Republicans are fascist and racist, or that it's somehow Donald Trump's fault. Okay, but it's easy and popular to blame former president, now President-elect Trump, for the lack of progress, but also incredibly weak and ineffective at a time when Democrats hold the executive authority. Sensible voices in the party at all levels of government should be amplified. I hyperlinked to an interview of John Fetterman. 5, the groundswell of activist support in favor of the Harris campaign was truly inspiring. So many people I know, so many of you here today, made their way to Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, New Hampshire, and elsewhere over these past several months. I think it's important, we're going to do 2 of those. I think it's important to carry that activism into the next set of elections. And we should think of ways to encourage everyone who made such a big effort to continue that effort in future elections, including midterm, state, and local, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, elections. Here we go. The grassroots organizations and ad hoc volunteers who led caravans of people to the swing states, Scott, deserve a ton of credit and adulation, so take a moment to thank any of those. Acting Carlisle, Concord, and Chelmsford's role in the American Revolution and our upcoming 250th anniversary have led me on an intellectual journey into American history. I've begun to better appreciate the twists, turns, and arcs of our nation's story, how simultaneously delicate, durable, and imperfect our country has been over these last 2.5 centuries. When I can't sleep at night, which recently is often, I read about Concord's decision to become quote-unquote radical in the lead-up to April 1775, the abolitionist movement, or Teddy Roosevelt's early journey through the New York State political machine. Whatever happens on election night, and I hope it's a Kamala Harris victory, I will maintain great confidence in our nation's ability to persevere over the long term. America is an absolutely incredible place, proven, I think, by the fact that we can be here today. We are so lucky to live here, and I appreciate that many of us are dismayed with various aspects of our political reality. Clearly, you know that I am. But to my mind, it's best for elected officials to lead with a love of the country and community. So that's what I'll continue to do. Finally, I said you deserve vigilance. Now, having expressed contrition, which I believe is a prerequisite, I feel entitled to talk about what's next. 4 points on vigilance. Number 1, we live in the state with the strongest abortion in maternal health care in the nation. That is not an accident. In 2020, the Massachusetts legislature, I was not there, I cannot take credit, overrode Governor Baker's veto to pass the Roe Act. Last summer, we passed the Location Privacy Act to prohibit companies from selling geolocation data of people going to pregnancy or related healthcare centers. This fall, we passed the boldest maternal health equity bill in the nation. We will continue to protect the sanctity of choice and your liberties. We will zealously pursue loopholes in that system, and we will close them. We live in the state with the lowest rate of gun deaths in the nation. This summer, we passed the strongest gun safety law in the country. That law was specifically designed in terms of constitutional law and principles of federalism to resist potential federal encroachment, and it will. We live in a state that cares about its new arrivals and has strained to welcome them, integrate them, and make them and their neighbors safe. But I want to be clear, the state government and local government have done this without any significant support from the federal government for the past 4 years. We in Massachusetts will continue to support and protect our immigrant population. You live in the state with the best public education system in the country. We will do what is necessary to withstand a potential decrease in federal financial aid from the Department of Education. We will move resources around and we will support our school children, including those with disabilities. We will not bend to the whims of a federal bureaucracy that attempts to impose curricula or contingencies that are inconsistent with our values in Massachusetts, which cannot be bought. I'd like to close with an excerpt from a 2004 essay from Howard Zinn that a friend in Concord who happens to be here sent me last night. Zinn lists major usurpations of power against autocrats or aggressors in world history and continues, looking at this catalog of huge surprises, it's clear that the struggle for justice should never be abandoned because of the apparent overwhelming power of those who have the guns and the money and who seem invincible in their determination to hold on to it. That apparent power has again and again proved vulnerable to human qualities less measurable than bombs and dollars. Moral fervor, determination, unity, organization, sacrifice, wit, ingenuity, courage, patience. Whether by blacks in Alabama and South Africa, peasants in El Salvador, Nicaragua, or Vietnam, or workers and intellectuals in Poland, Hungary, and the Soviet Union itself. No cold calculation of the balance of power need deter people who are persuaded that their cause is just. He wrote that in 2004.
And honest.
I believe your cause is just, so I intend to stick around, and I hope and know you will too. Thank you.